speaker, Dr. Yousuf Raza, who is an academic associate in logotherapy and holds a certificate in Franklin psychology. He also has a master's in psychology, and he has come all the way from Islamabad for this session. So we would like to call him on stage.
Okay, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. That was weak. Let me try that again. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Thank you. That was less depressed. Okay, so I have half an hour, and with your permission, sir? I've been doing this for like 8 years or so, and I just go and start talking, and people listen, and they appreciate or whatever, but to speak in the presence of Dr. Ali Hashmi is an experience by itself. So it is intimidating in more than just how he looks and the stature that you're standing in front of, so understand my predicament right now. Anyways, I'll try to give it my best shot, say something intelligent in half an hour about mental health problems and psychiatric medication. Practically, LUMS Psychology Society, Psych, LUMS, and LRS wants me to talk about everything that comes under the heading of psychiatry in half an hour. Isn't that awesome? So let me start by saying that's probably the first problem. That you expect for someone to give you an intelligent understanding of this subject in such a short span of time. And here we are. Anyways, I'll still do whatever I can. Let me begin with the 1920s. We're in Vienna, and in Vienna there's a particular problem that's going around, particularly in universities. Students in universities, particularly around the time of exams, when they get their report cards, there is an increased rate of suicide. There's an increased rate of suicide. So there's this one guy, a medical student at that time, and he starts a free service, a free counseling service. Volunteers himself, a particular conception that he has of what a human being is and what matters most to human beings, he puts that into practice. And students start coming to him. And lo and behold, 1931, he does this in the year 1930. 1931, there is not a single student suicide in all of Vienna. In all of Vienna. The person who did this went on to become a psychiatrist and a neurologist. He went on to get a PhD in philosophy, and he went on to get 29 honorary PhDs. And perhaps more important than all of that, or a bigger achievement than all of that, he spent 3 years in a concentration camp, in different concentration camps. The person I'm talking about is Viktor Frankl, author of Man's Search for Meaning, founder of logotherapy. And this was his conception of what a human being should be like, that he carried out, in which he, according to him, he found the experimental verification for that in the concentration camps itself. You all know what the concentration camps are, right? So I sort of teach undergraduate students, they're like, "Sir, jahan concentrate zyada karte hain, unki baat kar rahe hain." Please, don't do that to me. So you guys have an idea? You know Hitler? Right? You know what he did to the Jews? So when he did all of that, those places are called concentration camps. So you have an overcrowding of people. They can't exterminate their entire labor class, right? They need people to do the menial work. They need people to do all the laborious work. And they weren't that inhumane to exterminate all of them. So whoever is capable of working is retained, given some place to live. And whoever can't, children, straight to the gas chambers. Elderly people, straight to the gas chambers. Anyone seen Life is Beautiful? No? Okay. It's a good movie to see about what went around in the concentration camps. That and the boy in the striped pajamas. And you'll get a good idea what was going on. So Frankl was in one such place, Auschwitz. He's in the concentration camp. And that's where he said this, I found my hypothesis verified, become stronger, the experiences that I saw of it. See, one of the reasons why most of us resort to different forms of pleasure-seeking activities, and of them, of course, medications, I would go to the level of drugs. When in the 20th century, the predominant conception of what it means to be a human being, as is being interpreted by psychology itself, the greatest thinkers of psychology are talking about the greatest motivation or the strongest motivation for what human beings are all about. They're talking about, Freud, for example, is talking about pleasure as the strongest motivation, as that for which we do everything that we do. Right? And along comes Adler and he talks about power, will to power. That's why human beings are motivated for whatever they end up doing. That's Adler for you. There's a professor emeritus at the New York University, Paul Vitz. He writes in an article, this is back in 1997. He talks about how 20th century psychology is based upon reductionism, determinism, and autonomous individualism. And he sees this as a root cause in why there are increased incidents of disease in the 20th century, as to why people are becoming more and more depressed, as to why people are becoming more and more anxious, as to why people are becoming more and more addicted, narcissistic, histrionic. He traces all of that into theories within psychology itself, as to how these theories have permeated society, and how people have started believing, along the reductionist paradigms, that what we need to cure ourselves, to solve all our problems, is a pill. To the point that sitting in Benazir Bhutto Hospital in Rawalpindi, catering to a predominantly uneducated, illiterate, impoverished class, agar unke saath aap baat karne ki koshish kare, and I'm trying to do this with a lot of my patients, and trying to ask them about their what's going on at home, their relationships, other issues, crises, they have one look on their face. Some bluntly would say, Doctor Sahab, bahut ye gallan na karo, dawai deo. What we're looking for is a pill. We want a magic pill which will solve all our problems. We take a pill for fever, fever goes down. We have infections, we take a pill, infections go down. We take a pill for hypertension, it's controlled. So that's what we're looking from you. You're doctors, right? So give us a pill. We need a pill for attention, to pay attention in our studies. We want a pill for pleasure. And there are a whole lot of those available too. We want a pill to just shut everything out. So as one of the thinkers said, there's the typical American lifestyle. It's about caffeine through the week and alcohol over the weekend. So you're stimulating yourself through the week. You need that stimulation to do what you really don't like doing. And over the weekend, when you have to face yourself, when you have to be alone with yourself, and we're also afraid to be alone with ourselves. We have to just flip out our phones and log into like random people's Facebook pages and their profiles and their siblings, relatives, pictures, whatever, and commenting on that as if they really care. Checking into LUMS cafeteria or whatever. 25 likes. How pathetic is that? How pathetic is that? Do you really think people care where you are at that time? And apparently there are people who do care. What's going on? And so that's how the typical lifestyle is going. So what Paul Witz is saying is that this is rooted in how we have depicted human beings to be to the general masses. That they want their problems to be solved in a pill. That they are all about themselves. That they are all about themselves, me, myself, and I. That I have to work, why? Because for my own benefit, for my own pleasure. I go to school, why? So I can get to a college. Why do I go to college? So I can get a good job. Why do I want a good job? Because I want money. Why do I want that? Well, that's just what it is. Ends there. So I can get married. So yeah, Freud and Adler weren't that off. But then those hypotheses that they came with influence how we think about ourselves, how an uneducated person coming to a psychiatrist thinks about himself. Expecting pills to solve all their problems. Not to say that psychiatric medications are not effective. They're very effective. But they're not 100% effective. They're not 100% effective. They're not going to solve all your problems all at once. If you have if you have self-esteem issues, if you have relationship issues, if you have existential crises, if you have issues dealing with suffering, pills will not take those issues away. They may improve your coping abilities, but they're not going to eliminate all your problems in the wave of a wand. Right? So understanding that there is more to human beings than just that biological realm which would actually respond to pills, and it does, but that's not all there is. That's not all there is. So what Frankl does, and Paul Witz goes on to suggest that in the postmodern world, see, those hypotheses that were given by Freud, Adler, they were geniuses, but they were men of their time. And they're in sync with the natural science that exists in their time. And that science suggests a homeostatic picture of man. A self-contained organism, which is, as we all know, surviving. The fittest are surviving, and that's the competition. That's the race that we're all in. So in sync with that, it made sense. But if it really is about pleasure, Witz goes on to say, Frankl, with what he brings, with respect to the concept of a human being, that's what we need in the postmodern times. See, Freud said, based on his conception of the will to pleasure, that all that we need is pleasure, and that's what we do everything about. He hypothesized that if you were to put people in a situation where they're deprived of the bare necessities, and they have to struggle against each other to survive, you would see them reduced to their animal level. They would literally eat each other up. Frankl says, I beg to differ. I was, along with hundreds of other people, in a situation where we were deprived of the bare necessities. And I did not see human beings turn into animals. I did not see human beings tear each other up, or even commit suicide en masse. Even though a lot of people did. But he said, I saw at that time people rise to the epitome of what it means to be human. Of sacrificing even there for each other. Even though they barely had enough for themselves. Yet they are giving. Yet they are giving. They are there experiencing love of loved ones that are not with them. And finding themselves elevated, at least for split seconds, above the conditions of the concentration camp. Frankl says, I witnessed all of that. I witnessed all of that. And he goes on to say that if it is pleasure and power that human beings are meant for, or that's what they need, then the average American today has access to more sources of pleasure than ever before in the history of humanity. What an an average American has access to. If you want to talk about pleasure that comes through food. I had a friend, we have a lot of people coming from the United States to do medicine here. So I had a friend who had actually dropped out of UCLA. And we're just having fun eating and stuff. And he's like, you know where I've had the best Pakistani food? Yes. New York. Best Pakistani food in New York. And that's just food. So the best food of the most parts of the world, you'll have it at the disposal of the average American to enjoy. And moving away from food, if you talk about entertainment industry, moving beyond that, the kinds of ways that people can satisfy their sexual urges within the United States of America, unimaginable for a person 100 years ago. They have those things open at their disposal. At their disposal. The average buying power of an American today, and this is today perhaps more than what Frankel was talking about in the 70s or the 80s, the power that an average American has, if you compare that with any time before in any other place in the world, you won't find a parallel. But then, if pleasure and power are so abundantly available, why is it that if the main motivations, as was hypothesized, of all human beings are being supplied for, are there for them, not to mention drugs, they're there for them, why is depression continuing to increase? Why is anxiety continuing to increase? Why are drug addictions continuing to increase? There is definitely something that is missing. There is definitely something that is missing. And so, what Frankel comes up with, what he proposes, and that's what made his suicide counseling clinics work. That's what worked for him in the concentration camp. And that was the focus of his entire effort towards logotherapy. That pleasure is not something that is pursued. The more you pursue after pleasure, the more you pursue pleasure, the more it runs away from you. The more it runs away from you. And those on drugs will testify to this. Where druggies will typically tell you, particularly if they're on heroin, कि वो जो पहली 2-3 दफा में चस आती है, we're practically running after that for the rest of our lives. That feeling that we got. Tolerance develops and yada yada yada. It's just now what began as a pursuit of pleasure, they're only doing that to avoid pain that not taking it brings. And so the logical consequence of making pleasure your most important goal in life is biological stimulation to attain pleasure. The amount of pleasure that you get by biological stimulation is unparalleled. They did studies on these. Let's say when a human being feels pleasure, there's pleasure centers in the brain and there's dopamine that's released, right? So they measured. People had food, good food. Let's just say 50 units of dopamine released. Good enough. They measured the amount of dopamine released with people during a sexual activity. Let's say 70, 80. They measured when somebody took heroin. Take a guess. 500. Nothing compares. Nothing compares. I had a friend of mine, one of the very few people that I've seen overcome a heroin addiction, and he said कि जब हम ले रहे होते थे ना, उस वक्त कोई किसी और चीज का मजा नहीं आता. No girls, no parties, no food, nothing mattered. Only this. You guys have seen that video, right? It's so popular. कहाँ से आए हो? यहाँ कैसे पहुँचे हो? Dun, 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 dun. You've seen that. And you've seen that state of that kid. What does he live for? Lushan. That's what it gives you. That's what it gives you. Like in the example that Frankl goes on to give, he talks about how everyone here, you've had that experience. प्याज काटते हुए क्या होता है? आंसू आते हैं, right? प्याज काटते हुए आंसू आते हैं. किसी अजीज के फौत हो जाने पे रोना आता है. Are you gonna equate the two? Are both of the experiences the same? Even though the chemical composition of the tears may be the same. They may be the same. But are the two experiences, can you equate them? What pyaz is doing, what the onion is doing, is biological stimulation. It's a cause for tears. It's not a reason to cry. It's not a reason to cry. Similarly, what all of drugs give you, they are cause for happiness. They're not a reason to be happy. And so Frankl gives the example, chasing after happiness is like chasing after a butterfly. The more you chase after it, the more it evades you. The more difficult it is to grasp, to get. But forget about it. Go do something else. And the butterfly is going to come and settle on your shoulder. And so he says you need a reason to be happy. When you're pursuing a reason, when you're pursuing more particularly something meaningful. And meaningful for Frankl is self-transcendent. Again, this is where he breaks away from that autonomous individualism. This is where he talks about relating with other people. This is where he talks about sacrificing for others. This is where he talks about giving to others, doing for others. How he gives his own example. That within the concentration camps, he developed a condition called typhus. और उस वक्त concentration camp में यही understood था by all the doctors that were available at the time, including Frankl himself, कि आपको typhus हो गया और आप सो गए तो आप मर गए. If you go to sleep, you're dead. And quite honestly, the predicaments that they were experiencing, or the suffering, the degree of the suffering, was such that shayad marna was a more pleasurable option. A more pleasurable, a lot of people, they pick that option. What does Frankl do? He says, I have to keep myself awake. How do I keep myself awake? He said, what I told myself, I used to envision that when I'm out of the concentration camp, and I'm telling people of the importance of self-transcendence, about the importance about the centrality of meaning in the human life, as opposed to will to pleasure and will to power, the importance of will to meaning, of living for others, doing for others, how important that is, that even in suffering, you can find meaning. And in that envisioning, I found strength. Beyond that, when Frankl entered into the concentration camp, he'd written his book, detailing his conceptions of what a human being is, and logotherapy and everything. They can obviously, it's not a Diyala jail, it's a concentration camp. They're not gonna, you can take this on your way out. Deposit your book here, and when you're leaving, you can take it. That's not what happened. They just threw it away. And now what he thinks is like, I have to rewrite that book. So whatever pencil stubs he could find, whatever pieces of parchment paper, torn pieces of paper, whatever he could find, whatever he could muster, he picked that up and he started writing his book in shorthand. He started writing notes for his book. And that's what he said was that self-transcendent act. Why am I writing that? Humanity in the 20th century is desperately in need to be reminded of how important meaning is. There was a time when humanity realized that. There was a time where culture, society, religion, this is something that you could expect people to know while growing up. But the developments in the 19th, 20th century are such that meaning has taken a back foot. It has been relegated as something of a deception, of an illusion. And so I have to do this for people. And that's what helped me stay awake and not die. That was meaningful for me, he said. And here we are, around 60, 70 years later, and talking about Viktor Frankl, talking about what he did, talking about what he contributed. And so he says, you have a meaning to pursue, happiness will ensue as a byproduct, as a side effect, as a side effect. And power in that context will be a means, not an end by itself. So Frankl is not completely dismissing pleasure altogether. He is not completely dismissing power altogether, like his predecessors had, in a sense, dismissed meaning. He gives them a place. And he says, a lot of people today, where do we find ourselves? We have means to live, but no meaning to live for. No meaning to live for. And this is where he said logotherapy comes in. This is where realization of meaning comes in. Having said that, I don't want for this to be interpreted that people start looking at people who are suffering from any kinds of mental ailment. He doesn't have a meaning in life. He doesn't have a strong enough willpower. Iska to iman kamzor hai. That's a very immature understanding of depression. It doesn't become, you can't have, that's another kind of reductionism. That's another kind of reductionism. Pehle bichara bimar hai. There may be biological reasons for depression as well. That's in its own place. There will be psychological reasons for depression, or any other mental ailments for that matter. And yes, there will be existential causes as well. So all of them have to be taken into account. Human psychology, human beings are not that simplistic as we want for them to be. जिनको आधे घंटे में आप सब कुछ बता दें about everything there is to know about psychiatric illnesses and medications. So आगे बेचारे को कोई किसी को illness हो जाती है, हर एक को illness होता है. Just like psychological illnesses, just like physical illness. बुखार भी तो होता है ना, बाजू भी तो टूटता है ना. उधर जाके आप किसी को ताने मारते हैं, तुम्हारा बाजू कमजोर था इसलिए टूटा. Then why do psychological illnesses get this treatment? आगे बेचारा बीमार है और बेचारी बीमार है. Not even बेचारा, you're going through a human experience. You're going through a human experience. And on top of that, you're compounding that with more guilt. Religious guilt, for crying out loud. Everyone, and you'll find that a lot. You'll find that a lot. One of the greatest problems that you will experience, you'll see a lot of this on the social media, you'll see a lot of this in events. I'm sure these events happen in LUMS as well. Depression, anxiety, relationship crisis, suffering, grief, sari list laga ke, Janab, we got you covered. Attend our workshop and you're good. And who's giving this seminar? An engineer. Bravo! Brilliant! Awesome! सबसे मजे की बात, ये सब कुछ करने के बाद इंजीनियर साहब क्या लिखेंगे? कुरान और सुन्नत की रोशनी में. क्योंकि ये लेबल, ये कुरान और सुन्नत की रोशनी जो है, ये हमें लाइसेंस देती है कि हमें जिस फील्ड के बारे में टके का नहीं पता, उसके बारे में जो दिल में आए, जैसे दिल में आए, बोल दें. Without having any qualification, with only having read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That book is our qualification. To stand up in front of people and tell them all there is to know about psychiatric illness. So, when you're talking about mental illnesses, when you're talking about medications, please understand that there is a huge canvas. There is so many different aspects at work. I just barely touched upon one element that is usually not spoken of, and I think that's that. Thank you very much.